Good morning, distinguished guests, excellencies, ministers, members of parliament, diplomats, military leaders, business leaders, and friends. Welcome to the Athens Defense Summit and to our opening panel, the United States, Europe, and Collective Defense. For nearly 8 decades, we had the Transatlantic Alliance, which has served as the central pillar of the Western security. But today, these assumptions that sustain that order are being tested simultaneously by war, technological disruption, economic fragmentation, and polarization. So, at the same time, we have expectations within the alliance which are evolving. The United States are expecting higher European responsibility. Europe is debating about strategic autonomy. So the real question actually today is no longer whether Europe and the United States remain allies. That's for certain. But the real question is what kind of alliance will emerge in this new era? How will responsibility, leadership, and strategic coordination be redefined in a far more unstable and competitive world? So we're extremely fortunate to have with us today an exceptional group of leaders, thinkers, and former members of European establishment, I would say. So allow me to introduce you our distinguished panelists, Frans Timmermans, Executive Vice President of the European Commission for 10 years, Bilirakis, who will be introduced through a short video because he could not be with us. He had a grandson being born yesterday. Aristotelia Pelloni, Director of International Strategic Planning and Communications for the Prime Minister in Greece for the last years. Mr. Avramopoulos, you all know of him, former commissioner, current member of parliament, former defense minister, former foreign affairs minister, former vice president of the Party for New Democracy, mayor of Athens, one of the more successful, I would say. Correct me if I forgot any of the titles. And also we have Yannis Sarakakis, president of AmCham, currently, and Matthew Boyle from the United States, chief bureau for Breitbart News, one of the, actually the closest person in the media for President Trump, who knows better than anyone to explain us his perspective. So with that, let's begin by listening first and a short video of Mr. Bilirakis. So can we have the video?
I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you. Σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. As co-chair of the Congressional Hellenic Caucus, I have worked closely with my colleagues in Congress to strengthen the strategic partnership between the United States and Greece. Greece has proven itself to be a steadfast NATO ally, time and time again, a pillar of stability in the Eastern Mediterranean, and a nation deeply committed to democratic principles and regional security cooperation. Our defense relationship has expanded significantly in recent years through enhanced military coordination, joint training exercises, energy collaboration, and critical infrastructure investments that advance both regional stability and NATO readiness. I'm honored to address such a distinguished gathering of policymakers, defense leaders, industry experts, and strategic partners committed to strengthening the enduring relationship between the United States, Hellas, Cyprus, and our democratic allies throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. Unfortunately, I'm unable to participate in real time because I'm managing the debate for my particular bill on the floor of the House of Representatives today. For decades, American leadership has served as the cornerstone of European security and transatlantic stability. That commitment remains strong, but as we all recognize, the strategic environment is changing rapidly. Rapidly. The threats we have today are more complex, more interconnected, and increasingly global in nature, from great power competition and energy insecurity to cyber threats, terrorism, and instability across the broader Middle East and Black Sea regions. In this evolving environment, alliance cohesion depends not only on military capability, but also on political trust, shared democratic values, and strategic cooperation among reliable partners. That is precisely why the U.S.-Greece relationship has become more important than ever. I'm also proud to have founded the Congressional Hellenic Israel Alliance alongside colleagues who recognized the growing importance of trilateral and multilateral cooperation among the United States, Greece, Israel, and Cyprus. This partnership reflects a clear reality. Democracies in the Eastern Mediterranean are stronger when we work together. The cooperation we are seeing today, whether in defense, intelligence sharing, cybersecurity, maritime security, or energy development, is helping create a more secure and resilient region. These partnerships also serve broader American and allied interests by countering malign influence, promoting economic opportunity, and reinforcing a rules-based international order. Importantly, Elada has demonstrated leadership not simply as a beneficiary of collective defense, but also a contributor to it. That distinction truly does matter. As responsibilities within NATO and among allied nations continue to evolve, countries like Greece are showing that burden sharing is not merely about spending targets, it is about strategic reliability, operational readiness, and a willingness to stand shoulder to shoulder with allies during moments of uncertainty. The Eastern Mediterranean remains one of the most strategically significant regions in the world, ensuring peace, security, and stability that requires sustained engagement, continued investment, and strong alliances rooted in mutual respect and common purpose. I remain committed in Congress to advancing policies that deepen U.S.-Greece cooperation, strengthen the U.S.-Israel-Greece-Cyprus partnership, and reinforce transatlantic alliance for future generations. Thank you again for the opportunity to participate in this very important summit. I'm sorry I'm not with you personally, but again, duty calls here in the United States. I want to thank you for your leadership in advancing security, cooperation, and democratic partnership throughout the region. God bless you. O Theos Mazisas. God bless our enduring friendship between the United States and, of course, the Hellenic Republic. Σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ και γεια σας. As I said before, ο Θεός μαζί σας.
So we thank Congressman Bilirakis. I will start from you, Mr. Timmermans. Actually, you are one of the more successful commissioners in the history of the European Commission for 10 years, and this is recognized across the political spectrum from all the parties. You spent years leading at the center of the European project during crises, actually many crises. We had Ukraine, migration, energy, populism, and institutional fragmentation. Do you believe that European societies currently are psychologically prepared for a prolonged era of hard power, competition again? And I ask this because many believe that there is a gap between the current rhetoric and reality, and Europe must become, from an economic project, must become a geopolitical player. So what you believe for that, and if there is also, the patience for the society to have this new era, because we had all this crisis, so Europeans need to adapt without having a strong prosperity the previous years.
Thank you very much for your question, and thank you for inviting me to attend this initiative. And I think, we need in Europe more conferences and summits to discuss our collective security challenges. Now, to your question, we as Europeans tend to be overly pessimistic about our society and who we are. We are challenged in many, many ways, especially your generation has gone from crisis to crisis. I remember very well when Dimitris and I were working on the migration crisis in the mid-10s, how deeply also this country was suffering from everything that was happening across the Mediterranean. And I also remember moments of despair that we say Greece is never going to get out of this, Greece is going to get kicked out of the Eurozone, etc. And we held firm in the European Commission against those countries who advocated that, and we pulled through. And look at the success story Greece has been able to make of itself. And I think Greece should stand as an example that you can come out of the depths of crisis and rise strongly from that again. And if you look across the world, in Latin America, especially also in Africa, but in large parts of Asia, our way of life attracts a lot of admiration. And I think billions on this planet would like to live like us Europeans. And we're not proud enough of that, and we don't defend it enough. Now, if you allow me to step immediately into the issue of defense, I was trained as a soldier in the Cold War, and I served in the army as a Russia specialist for some time. And my brother has just resigned as a general in the Dutch army. He served 44 years. So we are a military family, and our background is completely transatlantic, and everything we've done is transatlantic. Now, consecutive American presidents have rightfully demanded of Europe to contribute more to its own defense. This is not sort of a Republican or Democratic agenda, because I think Obama was stronger on this than Bush, and then Biden was weaker on this, and now Trump is very strong on this. That's not the issue. But I also want Europeans to understand that investing in our defense and getting organized on a European scale should be a no-regret option. Whether this leads to the Americans appreciating it and strengthening the alliance, or whether it leads to things that Vice President Vance has said in Munich, the attacks that we see on European leaders coming from the Trump administration on a daily basis, whether this leads to a rift between the United States and Europe, there's no regret in strengthening our defense. So I hope and will invest anything I can do to rekindle the transatlantic relationship, but we have to be, the one thing that weakens us as Europeans always is either pessimism or wishful thinking. And we either do pessimism or wishful thinking when we need to be realistic. We can strengthen the transatlantic relationship, but we also have to take into account the thing that hopefully will not happen, but we have to plan for, that there is a real rift in the transatlantic relationship, and then Europe has to be able to take care of its own security. And if you look at the numbers, our economy, the size of our population, the technological invention we are capable of, and Russia will be a threat for at least 2 generations, either because it remains aggressive or because it remains unstable. One of the two is going to happen anyway. And the border between Ukraine and Russia is going to be the European security border. And we better plan for that. And we prepare our societies for that, who are, you're right, not prepared enough. But also here I'm optimistic. If you look at the way across Europe, people have welcomed Ukrainian refugees after Putin's invasion of Ukraine, this points to a form of solidarity on a European scale that we can build on. There are differences. People in Spain feel differently about this than people in Poland. That's logical. But we can bring Europeans together to foster this. And we have friends. The UK will be on board of this, even if they're not a member of the EU. Canada's on board for this, very strongly support Ukraine in all of this. Norway, Iceland is probably going to apply after a referendum for EU membership. We have some things going for us. But you are right, choices will have to be made in society. And when we look at military spending, we also have to be very careful that we build up European capacities and not only depend on spending in the United States. Let me stop here for now.
Thank you for that. A quick follow-up question, because you mentioned the narrative, and we had a discussion also yesterday with one of the founders of the Athens Defense Summit, Mr. Karamanlis. That narrative is something that Europe has underestimated,
Yes.
as you said. So I would ask you, that you have lived inside the Brussels bubble, serving at the highest level. Who would be responsible if you could decide for the narrative building of Europe? Who should run the narrative and who should be the one leading the way for the narrative? Because we have so many different institutions and so many different people. I'm not talking on a personal level, but as an institution. What do you think is ideal?
Well, I think the European nations in NATO have a particular responsibility. And since we're in the middle of an industrial revolution, we haven't even mentioned AI and the effects of AI on the military side and on the civilian side. You know, we have to reinvent and reinvigorate our institutions. That is an element in every industrial revolution in human history. You have to reinvent yourself. And we're not investing enough in that. And I think there could be something built upon the European NATO members. You could use a different narrative. You could bring leaders forward who could formulate that narrative. And there is a strong, strong tie between Congress in the United States and parliaments in Europe that could also be fostered a lot better. And we need to look at words. You know, the one thing I'm always asked about and attacked for is the Green Deal, which used to be extremely popular and then became extremely unpopular. But if you look at the core element of the Green Deal is energy transition. And if we as Europeans don't get energy transition right, energy prices will be too high and we will be at the mercy of foreign energy producers. We don't want that. So you could also say the Green Deal is a freedom deal because it gives us sovereignty in our energy resourcing, and it brings down the price of energy, which makes us competitive, our industry, on the world scale. So it's all about the words and images you use, and we have a lot of work to do there. And we need to link in with people in the arts, in journalism, the writers, the filmmakers, and look at ways of narratives that appeal to younger generations, which we are now missing.
Thank you for that. And for AI, I will come back on the second round because it's something very important that Europe has partially missed. Mr. Avramopoulos, you have served Greece and Europe through multiple historic transitions, from post-world optimism to today's return of confrontation. Do you believe that the international system is handling correctly this unstable era and that the West has experience to handle this, or we have all this prosperity from the previous decades, not specifically in Greece, but in general as the West? And a second question together regarding the second Trump administration, because you are a European by heart, and I want to ask you, all the Europeans, they judge President Trump. Sometimes they're right, sometimes not. I'm not the one who will judge, so I'm here to ask you, is there something positive that you have seen, at least one thing from President Trump which has surprised you and that Brussels maybe has not appreciated or assessed properly?
Okay. First of all, let me tell you that we do not represent Brussels here. We have experienced Brussels. And what Frans said before, it's very useful in order to better understand what's happening right now within Europe. But let me start from the first question. First of all, in handling this delicate situation, we can say that the international system did not show neither vision, neither strength or resilience or foresight. That's why we're a bit confused today. And defense, since we talk about defense, is very fashionable right now in Europe because some in Europe did not understand that geopolitics returned because of what's happening in the world, and Europe was not prepared. We have repeatedly said in the past that European projects should be completed earlier. In other words, to adopt a common defense and foreign policy, which does not exist today. And since the decision was made to allocate 850 billion euros for defense in the future, the question is, how can you handle this amount without having defined clearly who is the enemy and what is the threat? Because Europe is fragmented today on how do they perceive that, and what will be the impact on other programs of the European Union, like social solidarity and cohesion. So it is something that they have to handle in a very responsible way. Now, regarding the United States, well, let me be frank with you. I understand that the rhetorics were not very pleasant regarding Europe on behalf of President Trump. But there is a reality we have to accept over there. It was said before by Congressman Bilirakis. It is not new. It has happened before. It has been said many times. Burden sharing. Up to a certain moment, we were under the umbrella of protection of the United States. But given what I said before, that we didn't manage to adopt a common defense and foreign policy strategy, we are still exposed in big threats. So we have to admit that it is the moment for Europe to handle its own defense issues in a more independent way. And one more remark. Some believe that if NATO becomes more powerful, Europe will be weaker. No, a defense strategy of Europe can be complementary to NATO. So we shouldn't see this relationship in an antagonistic way. I believe it is the moment for the European leadership, together with the American leadership, to realize that we cannot move forward in this volatile world without being close to each other. And I fully agree with what Mr. Timmermans said before. So that's where we stand now. It's the moment for Europe to make a step forward, to decide to get emancipated from a defense and foreign policy point of view, and on the other hand, to strengthen even more the unity within the member states. Because as I said before, unfortunately, today we speak here, Europe is divided and fragmented. And this is, of course, something that other stakeholders globally are exploiting.
Thank you for that. I will come back on US and Europe. Now, Aristotelia Pelloni. Many in Brussels, they speak about strategic autonomy. Many in Washington, they increasingly expect European burden sharing, especially in military and defense spending. And all this time, Greece has arguably one of the most politically stable, long-term, for many years, 7 years, governments in the Western world. Actually, I think it's the only government that has been here before Biden administration, from the first Trump term until today. And you have been a central figure in shaping the Greek Prime Minister's international strategic narrative after many successive local, regional, and global crises. By projecting stability, credibility, and progress for the country without creating new enemies, because always the case is about solving problems without creating new ones. So, with New Democracy widely expected to secure a third win in the next election cycle, and with the country set to assume the presidency of the European Union, the European Council, in the next 13 months, Greece will soon be in a unique position to shape Europe's strategic direction at a very critical moment for the West. So, what should Greece's strategic vision be in helping bridge the conversation between European strategic autonomy and transatlantic cohesion, and how can Athens contribute to shaping new Western alliance narrative from your experience that will adapt to geopolitical, technological, and energy realities that we are facing? So, what's your view, what's your suggestion, what's your vision, and what Greece will do when we assume the presidency?
That's a lot, actually. I'm starting from the end on the Western Alliance. That will, I'm not pessimistic here, but that will probably take more than an EU presidency that lasts for 6 months. Let me begin, Nick, by all this discussion. Mr. Timmermans also mentioned it on European strategic autonomy, because it's like the word of the day, and I think it's sometimes misunderstood, or there are misperceptions on what it means. Or it's presented as mutually exclusive, from transatlantic cohesion. I think they're not contradictory, nor competing. I think they are complementary objectives and strategies. A Europe that cannot protect itself, cannot be sovereign, and with protection and security here, it's obvious that it goes well beyond defense. It goes to energy security, to supply chain security, to strategic dependencies, disinformation, cyber warfare, you name it. So I think a Europe that will be able to make its own decisions on industry, on energy, on defense, is a stronger ally, is a stronger and a better partner for the US as well. And a stronger European defense means also a stronger NATO. A well-armed Europe means also a better NATO. What I think is missing, and perhaps we could connect the dots here, as Greece, and what we are now realizing is that Europe has to learn to act strategically in an unstable world. It's another mindset. So, as far as Greece is concerned, I think, as you already mentioned, I don't think there is a dilemma here, either Europe or the transatlantic community, the transatlantic alliance. It's a stronger Europe within this community. And I'm not talking only about NATO. Alliances, communities have they concern people too. They're not mere security arrangements or papers or only defense capabilities. They're also based on values, democratic values. I think Greece is ideally situated at the crossroads of South Europe, Eastern Mediterranean, the Balkans, the Middle East, North Africa, sitting at the external borders of the European Union. Mr. Avramopoulos knows that very well during the migration crisis that he had to deal with as a commissioner. And also at the epicenter of dynamic regional developments in a shifting world order. At the same time, I think we're in a very good position to realize this not either or, and this cooperation. We're committed to transatlantic cooperation. We believe we have common interests, and we have to keep channels of communications open and keep engaging with the US. Everybody in this room knows that we've been meeting, the NATO defense spending target even during the difficult years of the crisis. At the same time, I think we have credibility built during the last years, during the Mitsotakis government, and we're also a credible ally and a credible partner in the EU on issues not only on defense, but also on competitiveness, social cohesion, defense capabilities. So I think we can offer all this experience, and because Mr. Timmermans mentioned Ukraine and the borders, and allow me here, I think we also have to add strategic mindfulness coming from the south of Europe and from the Mediterranean perspective. You see what's happening, developments in the Middle East and Iran. Here, these are the external borders of Europe as well. We're talking about the 360 approach on defense. We should not be forgetting the borders of Europe do not end at the Baltics. They end also here. And also through the fact that we are an energy and connectivity hub with the Middle East and India, I think we also have to contribute in that. So I don't know what the new Western alliance could look like, but I would like to insist in that it also has to do with people on both sides of the Atlantic. An alliance, it should be an alliance that protects prosperity, protects social cohesion, protects democratic values, and creates opportunities in a very unstable world.
Thank you for that. A quick question, because you're not a MAGA person or a deep conservative, so many wonder how you personally have created the bridges and ties with the administration, with Trump administration, and communication-wise. So what would be your advice to other European colleagues of yours who are exactly like you? They come from a background of a modest person, and they try to have some bridges because they think that, you know, the past defines the future. But in your case, we have seen that you can talk with anyone, and you can serve Greece together with the Prime Minister without, you know, glasses and political obstacles. What's your advice?
My advice? I think it would be common sense. Use common sense, and I'm always for engaging, for open channels of communication, and for trying to find every time what brings us together and not what divides us. I can name you a number of issues in Europe, in the EU already. Mr. Timmermans and Mr. Avramopoulos know better that could divide us. And look at the common target. We're democratic systems, this based on values. This is what separates us from authoritarian systems, and we have to protect all of our societies on all the levels I mentioned before. Use common sense, and also make ourselves stronger. Values are important, but in this world, values, it's good that if they are supported also by power and defense capabilities, and this can take us far beyond.
Thank you. But Matt, you will also tell us something about this as well. But first, let me go to Mr. Zarakakis, president of the AmCham. I have heard of him like being one of the more successful entrepreneurs of our generation many years ago, and he has invested a lot in building like an organization to help create another bridge between the US, Europe, and Greece. So my question is, for decades, the alliance was built primarily around military deterrence and economic integration. So today, however, we are entering an era which has simultaneously geopolitical fragmentation, AI, as Mr. Timmermans reminded us, cyber warfare, quantum technologies, I would say, energy insecurity, industrial competition. So what we are witnessing currently in the Western Alliance is something like simply called modernization, or the birth of an entirely new geopolitical order where technological supremacy and control of strategic infrastructure become as important as military power itself.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the kind introduction. No, I believe what we're witnessing is far more important and more profound than a simple modernization of the Western Alliance. Traditional military power, of course, remains essential. You know, deterrence, operational readiness, defense capability will always matter. But today, security is no longer defined by army fleets and weapons by themselves. It is increasingly defined by technological leadership, industrial resilience, energy security, like Mrs. Pelloni said, cyber capability, control of critical infrastructure, logistics corridors, etc. And the battlefield itself has also expanded. We see the introduction of artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, quantum technologies, advanced materials. So these are now strategic assets that have a direct geopolitical significance. And this also, of course, changes the nature of alliances in our alliance. The transatlantic alliance can no longer be functioning solely as a military alliance. It must increasingly function as a technological alliance, as an industrial alliance, as an energy alliance, and as an innovation alliance. So with this in mind, we can dare say that the transatlantic relationship has an important economic spine. And that spine requires constant strengthening, because when it weakens, the alliance becomes more fragile than the actual defense budgets may suggest. So the undisputed truth is that the US and Europe together are the largest economy in the world, a $10 trillion economy. And of course, there will be, from time to time, political disagreements, governments change, priorities evolve, and that is normal, and that is expected, and that is the nature of democratic and free societies that we live in. But when economic and technological independence remains strong and mutually beneficial, the alliance also grows stronger and more durable. We mentioned before about AI a few words, and I would like to make a comment on the technological sovereignty. For example, building our own AI capability does not mean just building AI models. It means actually securing the components, for example, that those models depend on. And today, a significant share of AI-related hardware is currently sourced from non-allied suppliers. So that is a strategic vulnerability that needs to be addressed because sovereign AI, of course, requires a sovereign supply chain at the same time. Do we have, I don't know how more time to talk about Greece, or can we?
I wanted to ask you about Greece. Yeah, what's your current, because that's something that I mentioned as well, what's your current view that we had recently? It's not related to US, but it's related to US and EU. We have Greeks taking more roles at an EU level. Currently, we have a Eurogroup president being Greek, Mr. Bilirakis, which 10 years ago would be considered a project unthinkable, I would say, not because of the person, but because of the situation of our country. So how do you see that and other developments and Greeks serving the alliance and the country performing well in this environment? How do you believe that all this helps in people like you doing business and helping also for your role at the AmCham? Like, we have a lot of Greeks that they participate currently more confidently compared to 10 years ago.
Yes, I believe Greece should no longer be viewed as a NATO's southeastern flank, a frontier to be defended, but actually as a forward platform for energy infrastructure that currently are developing, maritime security, very important for Greece and Europe, of course, and the whole global economy. Technology cooperation, we need to do more on that, and of course, that means more investment in southeastern Mediterranean. And there's also a broader structural shift worth noting, and this is something Greece is also actively developing recently. Armed forces across NATO are increasingly becoming active participants in production ecosystems, and particularly in drone and autonomous technologies, and functioning together with the private sector as co-developers, and in some cases even as distribution channels for exportable technologies. So Greece's armed forces are operating continuously in one of NATO's most demanding environments. This has not changed over the years, unfortunately. So we are very well positioned to play exactly that role, having the supply chains and production platforms where they actually matter the most. And we always like to say that Greece possesses the human capital, which is of course truth. And of course, I was reading a report that there is Greece, compared to its country size, is the most overrepresented nationality, let's say, in the high-tech space. So this is a statistic that is worth noting and tells a lot about the capabilities we have in our country.
Thank you for that. And also, I think you opened an office in Washington, so I will close with that and go to Washington Breitbart Chief Bureau. So, Matt, I will start first asking you about President Trump. You have closely observed and lived both the Trump movement and the realignment inside American conservatism the last, I think, 13 years or more. So is the future American right becoming more isolationist, or it demands a different definition of alliance and loyalty from the EU? Burden sharing, for example. So it's like historically military power defined geopolitical dominance. Do you believe that the MAGA movement realizes that, or they don't care at all, as many Europeans say, that we are isolationists, we don't care what is happening, we don't care about the alliance, because that's the narrative that have been built in some parts of the West?
Yeah, so there's a number of things that I want to unpack there, and also, Nikos, I want to thank you for having me here. This is my 4th trip to Greece over the last a little more than a year. I've been as well to Italy and Scotland over the last year, and also to the Middle East as well. So I've been getting out there, talking about this stuff a lot, but the fact is that we've had the warmest reception in Greece, and I think the U.S.-Greece relations are as close as they've ever been, and a big part of that is the leadership here in terms of the Prime Minister Mitsotakis and I have done a number of interviews over the last year, a couple of different ones. Both times President Trump responded to those in warm terms, and I think that the message or the takeaway from that for everybody around the world is this is not rocket science to work with President Trump, guys. It's really easy.
It's
right?
what Aristoteles said about common sense.
You find the common things. You find the common things where you guys get along and talk about those. And President Trump very much engages with what's out there in the media and in public. So that's where a place like, I don't work for the president. I'm a journalist. I work at a major media organization, Breitbart, in the United States, but the president regularly reads our stuff. I regularly talk to him. I've interviewed him multiple times this term and working on another one coming up soon. But the thing that I would say is that, now adds to your specific, and by the way, I would also say because it's a tough act to follow, everybody up here, really distinguished folks, and I don't think there's a single thing I've heard that I would disagree with, and I don't think there's a single thing I've heard that President Trump would disagree with. I think that the president is looking for friends and allies around the world, and he's trying to build those relationships and move the U.S. interest forward, which kind of brings me to your point about the isolationist question. So just last night in Kentucky, an isolationist Republican congressman was defeated because President Trump endorsed a primary challenger to that person. We've seen similar types of efforts inside the Republican Party in elections all around the United States, and the president is firmly in command of the Republican Party for sure, and the MAGA movement. The vice president is probably, Vice President Vance is probably the heir apparent to that. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, just came out the other day and said that if Vice President Vance runs for president in the future, that he would be the first person to endorse the vice president. So we fully expect that that will be how that goes. But the fact is that the President Trump is the leader of the party at this point, and of the movement that he created. This movement, you consistently hear President Trump talk about this and people around him. I know many people who work in the White House. One of my former colleagues comes to mind. He's the counterterrorism director on the National Security Council and a former editor of Breitbart, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, they just published the new counterterrorism strategy in the last couple of weeks, which is really a comprehensive document from Dr. Gorka at the National Security Council. He talks about this regularly. He says that the America first does not mean America alone. We consistently hear that from this White House, from this administration, from the people around the president. It means advancing the American interest on the world stage, but doing so with our friends and partners. And we're looking for friends and partners everywhere we can find them. I think that you see President Trump consistently, warmly receive anybody out there that is working with him. And this is why I think that the U.S.-Greece relations have been as strong as they've ever been, because I think Prime Minister Mitsotakis has handled things masterfully with regard to President Trump's return to the White House. I think a lot of the rest of Europe could learn a lot from the Prime Minister and what he's doing here. But we also see several leaders across the Middle East. One of the biggest stories that's happened in the last couple of days here is as President Trump is trying to achieve a deal with Iran. We saw several of the Gulf leaders, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the leaders of UAE and Qatar as well, speak with President Trump, call him, and they have a warm relationship. They've worked well together. The Prime Minister of Israel has worked together well with President Trump. So I think that and you see when President Trump travels around the world, even when he's meeting with countries that wouldn't necessarily be called our allies, he just saw him in China. He has a great relationship with President Xi personally, right? But they are the greatest adversary that we face in the world. And that is the challenge of the 21st century that we face in the United States, and frankly, that I would argue that the whole world faces. In the United States this year, we're celebrating our 250th anniversary. We're a relatively young country, right? Like, we know that. We're the new kids on the block compared to the rest of the world. But that being said, I think President Trump deeply cares about trying to set us up for another 250, another 250 beyond that. Well, hey, let's go for 1,000, right? Like, that would be great. But the challenges that we face, in the 20th century, we had World War I, World War II, the Cold War. We've taken some big swings as a young nation and a young society.
You were always the winners.
We've won so far, right? But the question is how long do we keep that going? And I think the big challenge going forward is we're in arguably deep into a second Cold War, if you will, with regard to China, and how do we handle that? And the two systems are deeply incompatible. In China, you have essentially an authoritarian dictatorship that's a communist regime. There's no such thing as private ownership. There's no such thing as private companies. There's no freedom of speech. There's no freedom of religion. These are things that are antithetical to the Western values that the United States was founded on, that many European nations were founded on. In fact, our founding fathers looked here to Athenian democracy to develop our Constitution and our Bill of Rights and our Declaration of Independence. And so those values are, frankly, we're going to live in a world where either the United States is going to be the dominant force out there or China is. And so which one's going to win this fight is going to depend on, which side our friends and allies around the world take, right? And so I think the president is deeply interested in working with anyone that wants to work with him to advance the interests of Western civilization. And the last thing I would add is when we're talking about the future of geopolitics and energy and whatnot, President Trump, just this weekend, I published an interview that I did on my last trip here with the energy minister here in Greece, and President Trump put that on Truth Social. And one of the things that the energy
He's a
minister
huge
said-
fan of your
Yeah.
stories. I mean,
Yeah, and so one of the
there's
things
a
that the
special
energy
relationship
minister
with
said is that President Trump's trademark move is what he called energy diplomacy. And so to the point here about the future of the 21st century and how things are going to move forward, energy is going to drive everything. We see it here in Greece, an embrace of that with the vertical corridor, with the new drilling, offshore drilling and exploration that's going to happen early next year with Chevron and Exxon off the coast, in the sea, in the Ionian Sea and off of Crete. So that's exciting stuff. And again, we hope that everybody around the world follows the lead of the U.S. and Greece in so doing. But the fact is that when we talk about right now the Strait of Hormuz being closed, whether it's the U.S. or the Iranians doing it with the blockade and so on and so forth, the fact is that that's one seaway, right? So the sea lanes are going to define the 21st century. So that's why you see President Trump focus on things like the Panama Canal, like what's going on in the Middle East, like what's happening in China, and the Taiwan Strait, the South China Sea. I mean, all of these things are extremely important in who controls the seas and how stuff moves. And I think the Greeks know this deeply because of the fact that dating back to ancient times, Greeks have been the world's leading shipping power, is going to determine the future of global commerce and frankly, which side wins in this big thing.
So one quick follow-up, if you can make it quick. There are discussions that the president will visit at some point Greece, and we really hope that this happens.
Yep.
So my comment here is that you discussed about Europe and how they're handling the administration and the alliance, and that what you heard here from Mr. Timmermans and Avramopoulos, that you heard things that President Trump would agree, but not all European political staff in our days are having, the gravitas, I would say, as, Vice President Timmermans or Avramopoulos. So how can President Trump visit, I hope he will visit Greece, but not only Greece, but having like a warm welcome in Europe while we don't have this connection right now?
Well, I think, he mentioned the vice president's speech to Munich. The fact is that a year later, we saw the Secretary of State come over and deliver basically the same address, a little bit different of a tone, and it was extremely warmly received. And I think that...
Really? By whom?
But the Secretary's speech?
By European leaders?
Yeah, European leaders were very warm about Secretary Rubio, I thought. So
compared to the first...
compared to the vice president. So I think that the message is getting through, and again, these are things that we want these Western values to be defended here. And I think, but I do think that just continuing to go out there and engage, again, one of the things, my first trip here was right after Liberation Day tariffs, and that was when I interviewed the Prime Minister here, the Prime Minister Mitsotakis, and he defended President Trump. He was the only world leader on planet Earth to do so. And he said, everybody needs to chill out. This is all going to sort itself out. I'm paraphrasing him here. This is all going to sort itself out. We're going to end up with a trade deal between the EU and the United States. And lo and behold, 3 months later, the trade deal was signed in Scotland with President von der Leyen and President Trump. And I would interview the president the next morning there in Scotland at his golf club. It's a majestic place. If you ever get a chance to go, please go check out Turnberry. But the point is that I do think that the president will come to Greece. He has said that he intends to do so, and I think he intends to do so this year. I don't know exactly when. The president's schedule is always, a little crazy, but I know the ambassador here very well, Kimberly Guilfoyle. She said that the president intends to come. The president has said that he intends to come. I think he said so at the Greek Independence Day thing. And again, he's been following a lot of these things, as have I can tell you right now that I've regular conversations with him, with the vice president, with the people around them, about the stuff that we are doing here, Breitbart is doing over in Europe, and the different stories that we're doing. Like I said, the president put them on Truth Social, right? Like, so he put the latest interview that we just did up there. he responded very warmly to the interview we did a few weeks ago with the Prime Minister at the Delphi Economic Forum, and said that Greece is a terrific ally, and he called Prime Minister Mitsotakis a terrific guy. So I fully expect that, I think that the warm engagement between them, and I hope that the president comes over soon, and I think it will get better. But again, I think that a visit is coming soon, and I think that you will continue to see, because of the fact that I think that the messages from both the Vice President, the Secretary of State, and from the President are right, that I think you're going to see more and more warmer and warmer reception to them the more that people engage on them on a human-to-human level.
Thank you, Matt. So, Mr. Timmermans, alliances were sustained primarily through governments, military structures, and hard power calculations. Now, also I want to comment for what previously it was mentioned. Do you believe, because you mentioned AI, that strategic blocks and geopolitical loyalty will win compared to emerging technologies such as AI and quantum computing, which we should all recognize that the US, they are leading, and they have helped the West in that context, in new technologies?
Well, you know, I'm originally a Cold War horse. That's where I was trained. And I worked a lot in the past on disarmament, on arms talks in Vienna and elsewhere. And we knew at the time that the arms race was a direct threat to humanity's survival. And the Americans and the Soviets and all the others worked closely to prevent that from happening. Now, what I see today is a comparable arms race on AI between the United States and China, with the same potential of disruption and putting an end to humanity. When I speak to the people in Silicon Valley, very smart people, very committed, and you see that this year alone, I think there's going to be 1.5 trillion investment in AI, this year alone, and they're all saying, we're working 20 hours a day, but still we can't keep up with what's happening. So, and China, I'm sure, is doing exactly the same. And I think we need a form of global, if I can call it, arms control to make sure that AI profits the whole of humanity and doesn't become a subject that gets completely out of human, legal, political control and then comes back and creates a lot of havoc. It is possible. I strongly believe in the potential of AI in energy transition, in creating new economies, in relieving some of the most burdensome tasks humanity has. I all believe in that. But I also know that if these systems get out of control, because we're so scared that the opponent is ahead of us, then I believe we can be in trouble. So I think the need to have a forum like we did in the Cold War of discussion of how we get this under global control, respecting the competition, respecting the fact that we're all trying to lead on this and that we don't have the same goals. And as you rightfully said, China has a completely different system at odds with our fundamental values. We need to understand that. But we also have a responsibility for humanity as a whole. And the global south could profit so much from what AI has to offer. Poverty could be reduced in the world thanks to AI, but it could also be a driver of new conflict. So I think that could be something we need to do. And if I look at the one thing that could help humanity overcome this, and this is where I'm most worried today, the most important thing we have as human beings is our capacity to empathy. Machines don't have a capacity to empathy. If we let machines undermine our capacity to empathy, undermine our capacity to see the other, even if we fundamentally disagree with the other, then the machines will win. And this is the last thing we can afford. So we need to get out of the bubbles. We need, to allow contradictions in how we see the world not to stop us from talking to each other. And that's where I worry about the transatlantic relationship right now. The attacks on already weak European leaders by President Trump are sometimes undermining the trust in this relationship. And the support to some of the most radical political movements in Europe that have a declared goal of wanting to destroy the European Union is also something we need to have a discussion about with the American administration. So I see opportunities, but we cannot allow ourselves to be naive, and I know President Trump well enough to understand that he doesn't mind that you disagree with him. He doesn't mind that if you're very strong in what you say, but you have to be consistent in what you say. And the lasting European, and I say this to my very close personal friend, Mark Rutte, being a sycophant will not change Donald Trump's mind. Confronting him with realities hopefully can make him change course, because he is able to change course. We've seen that in the past.
Thank you for that. So, Mr. Avramopoulos, one question about this also that came up with AI. We have the West and Europe for 3 generations. They prioritize globalization, economic integration, and soft power. And now we have defense spending, border security, AI spending, huge investments, and strategic autonomy at the center of all these policy discussions. So, for your perspective, was this inevitable that is happening? Is it happening because of some changes, political changes that were happening, or they're just speeding up, irrelevant?
Let me tell you that the European Union was taken by surprise on what happened. During all these decades, Europe had invested more on procedures than on strategy. And now we are invited to address this issue. Let me tell you something about defense that it seems that it has been forgotten. You know that in the year 1953, together with the coal and steel community, was decided by all Europeans at the time to set up a common European defense community. Actually, it was proposed by the French, and if I remember well, France, it was rejected by the French. So there was a gap there, and the gap was filled by NATO. Now we are all confronted with huge challenges. We have to go back to the principles upon which Europe was built. This is the responsibility of today's leadership, both at the national but also at the European level. Otherwise, we are going to run behind our achievements, including AI. So, it is a difficult situation, but it has to be handled in a very responsible way by the leaders of Europe, and on the other hand, to be supported by the people. The other thing I would say, yes, human rights, values, fiscal discipline, they are part of the European policy towards the member states. But values without instruments do and mean nothing. This is what we lack now. And coming back to defense, yes, we all agree on the strategic autonomy of Europe, but we have to define it in such a way that it will not backfire in the future. I said something in the beginning. We're going to spend a lot of money for defense, and we do well, because defense is a very important strategy and policy and tool. But if we do not manage to adopt a common defense strategy for the future, together with the United States, then I don't want to be very pessimistic. But it will happen what happened before the Second World War. If you have arms and you don't know how to use it and against whom to protect it, they are going to use them, against each other. Because right now, from the field of defense and all these procurements, 5 countries will become richer, definitely, and the others will have to lend money in order to buy arms. But without a common strategy on that, what is going to happen in the future? So it's not as simple as it sounds, and sometimes it is analyzed by all the ones who want to present their ideas. So we have to be very, very pragmatic. I say that because, personally, as most of us here, we are convinced Europeans. And one of the most convinced European leaders in Europe was Frans Timmermans. We had suffered together trying to get out of problems that we are confronted with, including migration, because migration arrived in our life the moment we were designated commissioners, and Europe didn't know how to handle it. On the top of that, we had to handle another issue directly or indirectly linked with defense, the common borders. Sometimes I hear people saying there are common borders of Europe. No, there are no common borders. The borders are protected by the member states. We do not have a policy, a common policy on how to defend our borders. For instance, if something happens with Greece one day, do you really believe that other European countries will come to support us? Or somewhere else in Europe? No, it's not the case so far. So there are many levels of responsibility towards the future of Europe, towards the future of the world. And final remark. If Europe does not manage to become not only a big economic power, but a geopolitical factor, its future is at stake. Because we risk, with what we live today, to revert to the dark pages of our recent history. And this has to be avoided by all means. So it's a question of responsibility. And on this responsibility, we count a lot in a positive way to our relations with the United States. United States and Europe have to stick together. We belong to the same world. We have defended the same values under more difficult conditions in the past, and we have to move forward in this new world together. And all these humiliating comments against Europe that happened, that were heard some time ago, have to be put aside. Everything has to be based on common respect and common understanding in order to build up our common strategy.
Thank you for that. One quick follow-up for Mr. Timmermans about the reaction to crisis compared to how US and Europe handle situations. So sometimes we have Europeans, when we have a huge development in the Middle East or somewhere else, releasing a statement condemning some developments in some Middle East country. And on the other hand, you have, on the exact opposite, President Trump saying, if you do not retreat, I will nuke you. And he makes a tweet or on Truth Social in the middle of the night, and but sometimes that works. So for me, both of them, they are completely opposite, but not 100% efficient. So which part you would keep?
Well,
and I'm telling you something that inside Europe it's discussed. I see many Europeans saying, we want some European leaders mentioning sometimes, not nuking somebody, but
yes.
Go back, leave the Christian minorities there alone.
Okay.
Do not promote violence, because a statement sometimes is not so threatening.
Well, I have to confess that President Trump, because of his Truth Social, has my complete attention almost 24 hours a day, which
He does
perhaps
that
might
with a
not
lot
be
of
the
people.
most sane
So
thing
you're not alone. You're not alone.
to do. But I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about us. We are organizing our own weakness by being divided. We do not put what should be the European Union foreign minister in a position to do her job, because we're always divided. One thing that would help being less divided is the fact that, and perhaps here it will not be a message that everyone likes, the fact that Viktor Orban lost the election helps Europe to be less divided. And I honestly believe that if we do not get our act together better and get rid of this one thing that has defined us and weakened us over the last 20 years, whether it's in a financial crisis or a climate crisis or other crisis, this element of moral hazard. It's an element that comes from the banking world, but the fact that we don't trust each other enough to see that the differences between us are smaller than the commonalities we need to face the threats we're facing, then if we don't do that, there will always be the same bland reaction from Brussels. The European Union notes this development with great concern and will follow it closely. It's hopeless, but that's what we're saying every day on everything that happens. And if, I do appreciate the discussion we had, that yes, there are huge security challenges in the Mediterranean, but we should agree as Europeans that the biggest direct threat to our security is Russia's imperialistic moves towards the rest of Europe, which, by the way, now also affects Greece if you look at the maritime drone that has ended up in Greek waters, because Ukraine is also expanding its missions outside the area, which by itself creates also a problem in the Mediterranean. So these are the things we need to see eye to eye on, and this is the one thing that I would plead day and night in the United States. Please understand that Putin is not your friend, and that helping Ukraine is an existential European and essential American interest, so that we move on and at some point establish constructive relationship with Russia, which is what this continent needs. Because at the end of the day, if we don't do that, Russia will by definition end up as a vassal state of China, and that certainly is not in the interest of the US nor of the European Union.
So, before going to Matt, just a quick follow-up. Some argue that although President Trump acts in a specific way or says some things, at the same time that they blame him for being a Putin friend or somebody who is very close, who is much closer to President Putin, he has, in the last 8 months, he has helped remove some Putin's friends from power. So, for example, Venezuela president, he has been removed after being in power for 12 years, and his party for the last 20 years. We have seen Assad, who controlled Syria for many decades. Even he survived the civil war, but during President Trump, he was removed. Also, we have some developments in other parts of the world that, in Iran, you had Ayatollah Khomeini, who Foreign Affairs Minister Lavrov said that he's a close friend, and a week later, I think it was a U.S. bombing that, executed. So, but although he acts as a friend of Putin, some say, at the same time, he leaves Putin alone at the same room.
But there's also another way of looking at all these developments, if I may,
sure.
Just very briefly. Another way of looking at these developments is, okay, Vladimir and I, we divide the world. I take the Western Hemisphere. I do whatever I like in the Western Hemisphere. She does whatever he likes in Asia. I was really a bit worried about what was not said about Taiwan during the last visit, and creating some insecurity about the arms sales, which seems to play into that narrative. And, treating President Zelensky in the White House by screaming at him, "You have no cards," seems to indicate that you signal to Putin, "Take Ukraine if you wish. That's your part of the world." That's also a way of looking at the same developments. In that context, taking Venezuela and Cuba at some point, something that the Russians will say, okay, if that means that I can do whatever I like in Ukraine and perhaps be aggressive to a Baltic state, which is something I personally fear in the near future, the Americans will not intervene, because that's how we have carved up the world, and Europe should take care of itself. That's also a way of looking at it. But what I'm trying to argue with the administration, and I know that in the State Department, in the Department of Defense, in Congress, people understand that we have to play the long game also with Russia if we don't want Russia to end up completely in Chinese hands. And you only play the long game with Russia if you help Ukraine survive this incredible moment. So if the Europeans pay for certain weapon systems, for heaven's sake, deliver those weapon systems and don't keep them back, etc., etc. So that would be my argument. I will lose no tears over Maduro being replaced. Absolutely not. And I think the regime in Syria is a murderous regime, and it's good that it's gone. All of these things are right, but I really need to insist on, for us, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is existential. And I just want to try and convince our American friends how important this is for us and our common future.
So there's several things I want to
Yes.
respond to here. So
Sure,
the
Mark.
first is that there's only one American president this century under which Vladimir Putin did not invade another country. That's Donald Trump, both in his first term and his second term. Trump is cleaning up the mess that that was left behind for him by Joe Biden. It was Joe Biden's weakness that invited Vladimir Putin into Ukraine. During Barack Obama's administration, we saw the Russian invasion and annexation of Crimea, and then during the Bush administration, they went into Georgia. So the fact of the matter is that there's one American president this century, since the turn of the millennia, that has not allowed Vladimir Putin to take or invade another country. And I think the results of what the president's doing, projecting American power around the world, speak for themselves. I get this question a lot here in Greece about the Turks in particular, obviously. It's a similar type of a thing. President Trump has a good personal relationship with these different leaders around the world. Similar type of a thing with Erdogan. He has a great personal relationship with them. But again, I always point to the results. You see these news stories nonstop. Oh, Trump is going to allow the Turks back into the F-35 program. Well, first off, it was Trump that kicked them out in his first term. And I think the first story I saw on this was 16 months ago. And are they back in yet? No. So I would point you to the results of what the president's achieved.
Just a quick
And then with regard to, with regard to Taiwan, you mentioned Taiwan, the Secretary of State came out and said the American position hasn't changed while he was there with the president. So the idea that we're going to change our position on this I just don't think is the case. So again, I would say that the results of what President Trump has accomplished here, look at what he does, not what he says, right? Trump uses, oftentimes, to your point about true socialists, believe me, I get it. Everybody worldwide is constantly watching whatever the president's going to say or do, whether it's in True Socials or other comments. He does long press conferences in the White House all the time. And you're trying to decipher clues about where he's going to go and what he's going to do. He deliberately uses that to throw off the adversaries of the United States and to advance his negotiating position. He's constantly in a negotiation. This is the way he thinks. If you read The Art of the Deal, if you read his books, you study what he does and what he's done over the course of his life, he's constantly negotiating with everybody and trying to advance things forward. So again, what he says and what he does are very different things, and oftentimes, but again, the results is what matters. The end of the day, like I said, there is one American president this century, and that's both parties, that in the United States, that there has not been a Russian invasion of another country. So if we care about stopping Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump is the answer. Not George Bush, not Barack Obama, not Joe Biden, from an American president's perspective. And if we care about containing China and answering that situation, again, similar type of a thing. We've seen more advancement from Western civilization in countering them under Trump's both of his terms, particularly now in the second term, than we've seen from any American president. In fact, many of our American presidents enabled the rise of the Chinese Communist Party. And then, again, similar type of a thing with any adversary around the world. And we've gotten major results, like I said, with Maduro and others as well. So, yeah.
So just a question to Aristotelia, but Mr. Timmermans, a quick comment.
Fascinated me for a long time. Why is President Trump so, can I say, enamored with strongmen, whether it's Erdogan or Putin or Xi? What is that? Is that a psychology or what is that?
I don't think he's enamored with them at all. He's working them on behalf of the American interest. So, I mean, you see this with Erdogan. I mean, he embarrassed Erdogan in the White House. Remember when he had Erdogan in there and he says, "Oh yeah, you know how to fix elections." Right, I mean, it was hilarious, right? And he broke him down. The fact of the matter is that I don't think he's enamored with strongmen at all. I think the president is trying to use every tool in his toolbox to advance the American interest, which I would argue, again, I think he would agree, as would his entire administration, again, the Vice President, the Secretary of State, et cetera, I think on down would all agree, that they are trying to they're trying to get our friends and for America to win this thing, if America comes out on top when it comes to U.S. versus China, and to your point about the AI arms race, I couldn't agree more. In fact, we just did an event last week in Washington with the Secretary of Interior, Doug Burgum, who's been to Greece multiple times. He's leading the President's National Energy Dominance Council. The Secretary of Interior in the U.S. does all the energy permitting and whatnot, and is doing the President's energy agenda, but he's also very focused on AI. One of the things we're talking about in the U.S. is a national framework, so we don't have 50 different rules in 50 different states and all the different territories as well, but you know, if you get to a national framework in the United States, then you can start to set the rules of the road, so China doesn't do that. But the fact of the matter is, if the U.S. one side's going to win. It's either going to be America or China. Do we want to live in a world where there's no such thing as private ownership, no freedom of religion, no freedom of speech, and everybody praises the communist dictator? Or do we want to live in a world where we can have freedom, right? Like, I think we want to all live in a world where we can have freedom. That means we all need America to win, right? Like, so everybody should be on Team America right now in the entire world, and that's what we're looking for. That's what we're hoping for.
At least I can say, and everybody agrees, that although Matt is not working for the government, for the U.S. government, he is much more successful than explaining, you know, their narrative compared to others. To Aristotelia, regarding all this discussion, you had a book called Ideology versus Realism, American Policy Towards Greece, 1963-1976, where you examined how great powers balance democratic values, geopolitical realism, alliance, cohesion, and strategic interests. So all this period that we are living right now in this international environment, from Ukraine, Middle East, Africa, Latin America. So do you believe the West is once again entering an era where this realism outweighs ideology inevitably, you know, replaced by defense, security, military capability? So, and who is right on that debate? Europe, US?
It's not black and white. It's never black and white. It would be easy. First of all, I'd like to very quickly say that also there are some misconceptions here, that I consider the return of some of the principles of political realism in foreign policy a good thing. Because what we've witnessed throughout history is that many times assumptions, preconceptions, misconceptions have led to great tragedies. So this is not necessarily a bad thing, but we're talking about realism, not cynicism. They shouldn't be confused. They're two different things. So I think we're witnessing a structural shift, a realignment of the world in many levels. They have already been described. Mr. Timmermans mentioned AI as well, which is a huge challenge. So this has led to the return of energy security, climate security, supply chains, technological security, sovereignty back to statecraft. How did this happen? This didn't happen overnight. I think we got here first. We had this rude awakening as Europeans. Perhaps for you, Mr. Timmermans, as you told, you were a Cold War horse. Wasn't, but the return of full-scale war in Europe was a rude awakening because it shattered all the post-Cold War security architecture, and it showed that peace is not a given. And also it showed that I will use the famous phrase here, that the holiday from history was over. And we have entered a new era, also an era defined by strategic rivalry between the US, China, major powers, using also technology, supply chains, economy as an instrument, as a tool.
So if you wrote a book
of national power, just give me, I just want to say something
Yes.
about Greece as well. That, you know, in this equation, Greece was a different story because of geography. Exactly, so we didn't have the luxury of being on holiday from history because there was an insurance cost we had to pay for living in this complicated neighborhood, and we always had to have credible deterrence and strategic vigilance, and we didn't have a peace dividend. So I think this is now becoming what earlier generations had understood, now is becoming the broader consensus in the West, in Europe definitely, that security in all its forms, not only defense, is the basis, is the foundation of prosperity, of democracy, of social cohesion. So we need stronger defense capabilities. We need to create new alliances and fortify old alliances. We need strategic resilience. And of course, we will not, that's why I said it's not black and white, and it's not either or for me. The West should not and will not stop defending fundamental values. This is our core, but they have to be supported by all the other elements.
So if you wrote a book again, that's the question I wanted to ask.
It was my doctoral thesis, by the way.
But
And it was dealing with a very painful period in Greek-American relations
so
and in modern Greek history.
if you wrote a new book, what would you explore at this period? Because you mentioned like the new era that we're living. So is this about this new era? Is it about media and
I haven't really had time to give this a serious thought, but the truth is that the multiple crises I have also experienced, you know, working with the Prime Minister, working for the government from various crises, always crises from the beginning, are a temptation. If I would decide to write something after many, many years, I think it will be a cliche, but it would kind of remind you in the beginning something of the tale of two stories. Like, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. So it's still a work in progress.
So one last comment from
Yes,
Avramopoulos, and then
we have run out of time, but you know, I was inspired by the exchange of thoughts on the Euro-American relations. They didn't start well in the beginning of the Trump administration the second time, but now they are getting better. They both show better understanding. I will remind you what happened when President Trump said that to the Europeans, if we were not for you, today you would all speak German. And then King Charles, who was there, said, if we were not for you, today you would speak French. And now you can say here, if we were not here, the Greeks, you would all speak Persian.
So it's true. It's true. It's true. It's true. We
Matt,
speak English.
Matt, I think you agree with that. So because Vice President Timmermans mentioned the Munich reception, I mean, he reacted, and I said that the response to the Vice President, J.D. Vance, last year was not, you know, very warm, I can say. So
Sure.
Compared to the first term, it's something different, because the first Trump administration, the Vice President, he had a normal relationship with Europe, while here we see that with Vice President Vance, who is the younger generation, who represents a younger generation of conservatives, there are a lot of reactions against his, his thesis. So just a very quick comment, because we really need to
I would just say, give him a chance. You're going to see him engage a lot more. I think you're going to see Vice President Vance come over here. Look, we have a midterm elections coming up in November, so you probably won't see a lot of travel from the senior levels of the administration until then, but I would imagine that after that, I know that he wants to come here to Greece. I know that he wants to come to all over Europe and engage and have these discussions, so I would just say give him a chance, because I think there's a lot of promise there. He's a really smart guy, and I think you're going to learn a lot from him. And I think that he's going to He's going to be a great leader for the future of the United States.
Actually, here in Greece, it's always the reception and the weather is always warmer for all our American friends.
Yes.
So with that comment, I want to thank you all for
Thank you.
being at this panel and all our participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you.